morning, Fort Wayne Community Schools. I am Dr. Lori Desatel, Assistant Professor in the College of Education at Butler University. I am absolutely thrilled to be sharing a framework of the application of educational neuroscience with everybody today for just a short period of time. I want to explain what this framework is and then how we can implement it in our schools, in after-school programs. It's about early childhood. It goes all the way through higher education. And inside this framework, we are looking at 4 facets. And the very first part of this is really understanding and being aware of our own brain state. Now that sounds simple, but many of us are so busy, we are called to do so many things, that it's so difficult for us to really step back, take those 2 or 3 deep breaths, and really think about how we are sensing the environment, sensing the experience that we're in, how we're feeling, and how we're interacting with children and adolescents. So when we think about the application of educational neuroscience, I begin with my brain state. And this is so true about the context of how this framework is implemented with regard to discipline. Because we understand that when a dysregulated adult is trying to discipline a child or an adolescent, it all goes awry. Because a dysregulated adult cannot regulate a dysregulated child. So when we think about our brain state, I really want us to think about not just self-care, but really understanding what we can do in the moment when we are feeling rough, as many of our children and adolescents are feeling when they walk into our classrooms and buildings. The second leg of this is about regulation. And that's become a buzzword, but I want to share with you another synonymous term for regulation, and that is being in a brain state of relaxed alertness. That's really what this is about. It's being able to operationalize and get to these executive functions that live in the prefrontal cortex. So those executive functions develop over time. They are about paying attention. They are about emotionally regulating. It's problem solving. It's creating a pause when we need to. It is being creative and evaluative. It's taking information and pulling it all together and figuring out not just a solution, but maybe an alternative. So these functions up here, we need to access our calm, relaxed state to be able to do life and to do school through those executive functions. When we put the prefix co before regulation, co-regulation, that is what we are being called to do right now in our schools and districts with students who chronically come in dysregulated and rough, and more often than not, they have experienced adverse childhood experiences. And this study, the largest public health study that's ever been completed, has shown a new light, has given us new research that we cannot not look at. The Adverse Childhood Experience Study identifies, the newest one identifies probably 12 or 15 adversities that can interfere not only with learning, but actually can reprogram the developing stress response systems in our children and can affect the way that early and even middle childhood brains develop. So when we think about the chronic behaviors that we see, co-regulation is the very first step in the discipline process. The third leg of this is looking at connection and attachment. Connection and attachment are the root of brain development. When we are securely attached, we can oftentimes emotionally regulate. That is how connected those 2 pieces are. And I want to say this about connection to and attachment. What we know is that chronic behavioral issues that we're seeing in our school are oftentimes regulation issues. And those regulation issues are physiological issues. So the regulation, the connection and attachment, my brain state, are 3 of the 4 legs of this framework. The 4th leg of this framework is teaching our students as we learn ourselves about their neuroanatomy. So we want to be able to really learn with our students. Many teachers and administrators, when I walk into districts across the country, will say to me, but Lori, I don't have that science background. I'm not a neuroscientist. And I want to share that's a great thing, because the students love learning with you. They love that you don't have the answers. So when we think about these 4 legs, everything in this framework is nothing extra that's being asked of you. It's a framework that supports social and emotional learning. It supports PBIS. It supports all programs such as Leader in Me, Zones of Regulation, developmental design, responsive classroom, all of everything that we do, programs, academics, discipline. When we talk about school safety and social emotional learning, it's all about the brain science. And here's something so interesting. We know right now that there is a 17-year gap between how physicians are practicing and what the research is, how the research is informing the medical practice. And if there's 17 years in the medical profession, it must be much more in our educational profession, because the educational neuroscience or the neuroscience research is really sharing intimately and in detail about brain development, and that affects all behaviors and all of the achievement gaps that we are seeing in our schools and districts across the country. So the brain develops from the very back, the brain stem to the front, and from the inside out. And there's one main ingredient that builds brain architecture, and that ingredient is experience. Our experiences build our brains, whether we are immersed in healthy, nurturing experiences, or we are a part of very toxic or in the midst of a lot of adversity in our developing years. And in the first 1,000 days of life, which is utero, through the first 2 years, our brain develops at a rapid pace. The research is sharing that we begin seeing neurons connect, synapses form 40,000 every second. So, I mean, that's just amazing. And so many of you will think, well, I teach middle school or I teach high school. What does that have to do with me? Everything. Because the experiences that student has carried into the classroom through those early years are held implicitly or unconsciously. Oftentimes those adversities rest in the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere is where we carry visual images and negative emotion and implicit memory. So when we think about that first phase of brain development that begins in utero, we have to really think about the impact of those experiences and then how that looks in our classrooms. So the strategies that I will be sharing continually are strengthening attachments and connections, that things that we already do through our procedures and routines and transitions, and also regulating the nervous system of a student even before they do an algebra problem, before they come in and they start to read a chapter or they start to share a group project. Because what we know is that many of our children and adolescents are coming in a survival brain state. So that brain is locked up in that brain stem or in that limbic system. I've talked so often about how the amygdala, or amygdalae for 2, is located right above our ears and deep in the temporal lobe. And this is our emotional smoke detector. It mediates fear, learned fear, and innate fear from our experiences, how we perceive experiences in our environment. And so that brain stem is really mediating all of the regulatory functions. So brain stem and limbic area, when we are locked in those 2 areas, that is a survival brain state. And when a child or an adolescent is locked in that fight, flight, or collapsed or disassociated frozen state, they cannot access this prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of doing school and doing life, all those executive functions I mentioned earlier. So I now, in my classroom, I'll be entering 5th grade this year. I am now learning every day that I need to understand that I've got to meet that student in their brain state before I teach any academic area. And that happens through procedures, that happens through transitions, through routines. It happens through bell work, and it happens through morning meetings. So I am going to be sending a lot of resources for all of you and I actually have this little pamphlet today that is called the Applied Educational Neuroscience Menu. And inside of this are a list of sensory or regulation strategies, and also what we're calling connection strategies, touch points. Because what we know is that when that brain is calm and when that brain feels safe and when that brain feels connected, the brain learns. And really, it's I don't think I could say that any clearer. And it's true for me, it's true for adults. When we feel safe and when we feel connected, we can learn, we can be creative, we can laugh, we can see other perspectives. So this is just one of many strategies that I'll be sending you. But before I go into just give you just a couple of examples of these, I want to share the second greatest time of brain development. And I did not know this when I was going through my pre-service teaching training. And that is that adolescent brain begins really consolidating synapses and proliferating, creating new synapses, starting at around 4th or 5th grade. And remember, development is chaotic. It doesn't happen in a linear fashion. And so I know that those upper elementary students all the way through probably high school are pruning away or consolidating synapses that they are no longer using. And that brain is becoming more efficient. So it's organizing, it's disorganizing, and it's reorganizing, because the brain works as a beautiful system. It's not about one region having one task and another region being responsible for another task. I remember Dr. Bruce Perry saying this. It is about the beautiful interconnections in brain architecture. So a couple of things. When we know that a child or an adolescent is walking in with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, the research shares with us that they are 32.6 times more likely to have academic and behavioral challenges. And for me, as an administrator, a counselor, a social worker, an educator in any role, that is critical for me to understand. Meaning that oftentimes they will be coming in rough and they will not be ready to learn. So they will be spending most of their energy and time making sure that they trust the people in their environment, that they feel safe, and that they are connecting in some way. So what are regulation strategies? Let me just go through a few. We are setting up some sensory areas in our room. We're calling these amygdala reset areas. And in those sensory areas, which I can share 20 or 30 different photos, and I actually have created a YouTube video that talks about an amygdala reset area or amygdala first aid station. When we teach our students about their neuroanatomy, it's very important to all of us. We need to use common language. We need to talk about the amygdala, not a calm corner, not a mindful moment. Those are fine, but they don't bring the science and the why for the buy-in for our students. So looking at sensory tools in that amygdala reset area, we might have a corner in our room. We might have an amygdala reset room in our school. It has 1,000 faces. We could have an amygdala reset area for teachers. So we might have water available. We might have just a bowl of mints. We might have an elliptical or a stationary bike. We might have blank paper and markers and so students can write students can use drawing and coloring because that's very calming to the nervous system. We might have some regulatory tools like a pulse meter. And actually there's an app on your phone that's free, and when you hold your finger up to the light, it takes your pulse. And that is regulating for students, just to be able, when they start to amp up, it's really cool for them to be able to see how their pulse changes. Focused attention practices are one of the best ways to model for our students how to get calm and how to really be in the present moment. Focused attention practices use our breath. And we start with maybe 3 deep breaths. We might breathe in our favorite color. We might breathe out a worry. We might trace our hand as we inhale and exhale. We might use our hands and use movement and breath, because movement and breath are regulatory strategies to calm that nervous system. So we might take one small breath, so we breathe in and exhale. We breathe in again, a larger breath, and exhale, and we breathe another one, and then we exhale. In this menu of strategies and on the Edutopia website under Lori Desautels, there are several examples of how we are using focused attention practices: a taste, a sound, a visualization, using our breath, using rhythm, and using movement throughout our classrooms. And again, these become a part of your procedure. So just as you would collect homework, or you would have a procedure for how you begin any academic work in the morning, you would begin your morning with a focused attention practice and giving students an opportunity to just take some deep breaths. It's always a choice. We always reflect after a focused attention practice, and we talk about how that felt, and we start really small, 3 seconds, and then maybe as a class we challenge each other to grow that amount of time each week. So while we are breathing, we might be listening to some music. Some of the students may just want to put their heads down and close their eyes. That's absolutely fine. So when we think about morning meeting, we use drumming, we're using rhythm. It's kind of like just with our hands, we can clap a rhythm and the students can respond. We can rumble and then get louder and softer. There are all of these strategies that I've talked about. We're using brain intervals, and I always do this one. I always put a peace sign up and an okay sign, and then I ask you to switch and go back and forth as fast as you can. And the reason I can do this well is because I do it all the time. It is through patterned, repetitive experiences that our brains begin to make and create new neural circuits. So connection strategies are also in this booklet, but we want to think about amping up and being intentional about the ways we notice a new haircut, we notice a pair of tennis shoes, we notice a tattoo. We want to be able to intentionally maybe implement a 2x10 strategy, where we spend 2 minutes, 10 days in a row, intentionally connecting with the passions and the interests of that student. So we are also using active constructive responsing, which is Shelley Gable's work out of University of California, UCLA, where we ask for details when a student shares a story with us. These are just intentional ways to help students learn how to ask questions, to share details, and also it gives them an environment where they begin to feel safe and feel felt. So one last concept that I want to share with you, because this has been a shift for me. We don't get angry at students if they don't understand how to do an algebra problem. We teach them. We don't get frustrated when a child doesn't know how to read. We break the reading skills into sub-skills, and we teach them over and over again. When a child doesn't know how to be kind, that is no different than not knowing how to read. Circuits in the brain for kindness take patterned, repetitive experiences. Circuits in the brain for empathy take patterned, repetitive experiences. This is why our discipline models must change. We must begin to really look at modeling and teaching the behaviors that we want to see when our brain state is regulated and calm. I'm available to all of you for the entire school year. I wish you a wonderful start, And thank you so much for these few minutes this morning, and I will see you soon.